All right. How are you, kids? All right. Here, we're doing our first lecture, and we're going to start talking right at the beginning about some of the prominent themes that are present in environmental biology that we'll be talking about throughout the entire semester. And your book starts out with a comment from a Nobel Peace Prize winning woman. Her name is Wangari Maathai. And what she was talking, the quote that the very first thing we talk about in this class is this quote, which says that today we are faced with a challenge that calls for a shift in our thinking so that humanity stops threatening its life support system. And in 2004, this woman won the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's something to start us thinking about here at the very beginning of our course. One of the things I like about this textbook is that it is organized around it starts out oftentimes, I guess always, at the beginning of every chapter, there is some kind of case history. And I want us to keep in mind that Wangari's quote where she was saying that we're crazy, we're doing things that have this really negative effect on our own world. We're poisoning our own world. And there's this, there's a little video I want you to watch, and it's, the link is there on the slide right after Wangari Maathai's quote. And I want you to watch that, and it's about an island in the Philippines. And it's an example of people threatening their own life support system. So what they had gotten to where they were doing is they were overfishing. They were overfishing, they were on an island, so of course the main source of protein was seafood, and they were overfishing, but they weren't using what you might call traditional fishing techniques. They were using dynamite. You heard me. They were using dynamite. And so go figure, if you blow up the reef, yeah, you can get fish. You just kind of paddle over to where they're floating on the surface and you pick them up. But what about your kids? So we have an idea, this way of thinking. It's something called sustainability. And the sort of a working definition of sustainability would be meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of future generations. So what about dynamite fishing? It meets the needs for today, but you blow up the reef, you don't, you pretty much ruin it for people later on. So anyway, as a result of these highly destructive fishing techniques and the loss of the ability to catch food, these Apo Islanders decided they wanted to do something differently. You know, they wanted to make a change. And so they started thinking, so how can we rebuild our fishery? And they came up with this really an interesting idea. And the only way this kind of an idea works is if the whole population buys into it. But the idea was that they would set aside 10% of their coastline as a no fishing zone. Now, if the government went in and said, you can't fish there, what would happen? They'd be sneaking out there at night catching fish. But because the population decided they wanted to fix their ecosystem, what happened is they were all sharing in the responsibility of this reserve. Now, what did the reserve do? The reserve allowed some of the population to be of fish to be safe. And as a result of that, they would breed and, mate and have little fishes, right? And the little fishes would say, well, this area is full, so I'm going to move over there. And so what happens is by having this protected reserve, they repopulate the reef around them. Now, the thing that was very controversial in the Philippines had to do with some regulations. They had to pass laws that prevented people from other islands that were dynamiting their reef, from coming over and catching the fish in this area where they had set up this protected zone. So they were able to get the government begrudgingly to approve this. And what happened is life got good. And what would happen is they had to protect the preserve, and so the different fishermen would take turns policing this no fishing zone. And so they all benefited from it. And it turned their world around, and it even spawned people some of the young people who said, well, gosh, maybe it's important to know about this ecosystem that our life depends on. And so what did they do? You had to have kids that are becoming marine biologists, and life is good. And so it starts out with your book starts out with a very positive example about how society can change. Society can change. And the Apo Islanders are an example of this. So they lived on a little teeny tiny island. Well, I think it's not a very big island, but they lived on a small island, and the reality is that, of course, if they ruined that island, what could they do? They could go to another island. But if you sort of increase the scale of all of that, if you increase the scale of all of that to the point where we say the Earth, the biosphere, we're kind of doing the same thing, right? We're changing our environment where we have all kinds of problems, and we'll be talking about a lot of the negative stuff here in chapter 1. And so we start out with something really good, and then we say all the bad stuff. And so it's kind of parallels what had been happening with the Apo Islanders and their solution. And the reason this is important is we don't have another island to go to. We don't have another planet to go to. Yes, there are other planets, but the Earth is really unique. And the reason for that has to do with our life, what we depend on. So what do we depend on? We need light that's just at the right intensity to where it can support life. The ultimate source of energy in the world is through photosynthesis, basically, through capture of sunlight energy by plants, converting that into macromolecules, which are then food that we eat. And so we have to be the right distance for that. And we also, what's the other thing that you always say? So when we start looking at Mars and we say, wonder if life ever lived on Mars. And what are they looking for? When they look at Mars to see if life maybe ever lived there, you look for carbon. So, because we're carbon-based life. Life depends on the element of carbon. But they look for one other thing: water. You have to have carbon and energy from the sunlight at just the right intensity, and you have to have water that it can exist in a liquid form. And we're the only planet in our solar system where we're the right distance from the sun to have water existing as liquid and gas and ice on occasion as well. So it can exist in the 3 different forms. And it ends up we don't have anywhere else to go because this is the only planet where that's a possibility. Now, our solar system is humongous, right? And so we say somewhere out there are other stars with planets, no doubt, with the one that is just the right distance from the sun. But here's the problem. The closest star to us is 4 light years away. Now, what does that mean? 4 light years. That is a distance that takes light, traveling at the speed of light, 4 years to reach us. Well, how are you going to get there? How are you going to get there if it's going to take you, 100,000 years to get there, not traveling at the speed of light? So we don't really have but this one planet. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop right here and we'll come back and I don't want these little video blogs to be too big, and we're already at 11.5 minutes. All right, I'll be right back.